that sadly was a little bit out of date. We were expecting an updated one, but that's from 2022. So I'm not going to go into detail in my presentation of what's changed. I'm going to look a little bit in the short and long-term future, and then sort of lead on to what Alex has got to talk about on sustainability. So while Klaus is trying to find my presentation, I'm Jeff Lockwood. I work at EBM Pabst. Yep. I'm the chairman of the fan working group at Evium. I'm also chairman of ISO TC117 fans, and I'm convener of working group 17, the European Committee for Fans. So as I said, I'm going to talk about the regulation, but from looking at what's happened now, and also there's some corrections going through, but looking at the sustainability circular economy aspect. So looking at this first part, the new bits, a lot of that has been achieved by us, Evia, lobbying the Commission. So, performance determined by direct measurement, clearer definitions, jet fans, dual use compensation, circular reversible compensation was all achievements of the Evia working group. The annex, I would suggest, is clearer than the old regulation, and that's on the back of some of the work in the fan technical committee working group 17. The blue and the green, though, is the start of what's coming next for us in the future, but also other products. It's the circular economy, the sustainability aspects. I would argue these are fairly simple, but they are a big impact on us as a business. We have to produce a lot of information to meet these requirements, but it gives us an indication of what is going to come next. Sadly, the regulation that was published in July has got some errors. So one of the errors is in Article 9, and to be clear, the application of the requirements of this regulation will happen in 2 years' time, and it will be 3 years for fans integrated in other products and 13 years for spare part fans. That doesn't say that there. So Ronald Peers is in the process of raising a corrigendum, a correction. And also, we found, when it was published, there was a tolerance of 2% on speed, which many fan manufacturers will find challenging. So we've managed to persuade the Commission that we should change that to 5%. But Italy, member state Italy, wanted some extra definitions in impeller diameter, tip speed, and what is the speed? And so when do we measure our performance? Do we measure it at maximum speed, and what is maximum speed? That's still causing us problems, even though we have lots of definitions in standards. The text there is what the policy officer has put into the revision. If you don't like it, we have to try and persuade otherwise. Okay, status of there's a standard that runs parallel, did run parallel with the review of this regulation. Unfortunately, it's been delayed because of COVID and some confusion, but it's now in a position where it's gone back to inquiry and it's out for voting. So those of you that are involved with member states standards, groups, make sure you put your vote in and make your comments now, because this standard will be commented or be reviewed later this year. The changes were feedback from the policy officer. There were some things in this draft standard he wasn't happy with. We'll try to take that on board, but we need this standard because it adds clarity to the regulation. There's some interpretation. Even though this regulation has been published, some things still aren't very clear. And so the industry, Eurovent and European AMCA, for example, have really started the process of frequently asked questions, and Evia will be part of that. And some of it is things like this compensation factor that's in there now, compensation factor for the guard. There was some text on the left that Ronald Peers put in to a previous comments around the revision that hasn't gone into the main standard, which is probably good. But the compensation factor for this guard is based on the gap between the rings of the guard. And the question is, if you had a guard where the gap in one place was, say, 6 millimeters, but the rest was at a gap of 15 millimeters, which compensation factor should you use? The problem now, though, is what compensation factor would the market surveillance apply on you? Because you make a decision. You might think, oh, well, I know what I'm going to use. I'm going to use the 1.16 or 1.15 compensation factor. But the market surveillance could have a different opinion. They have more power than you, and therefore they could say, you've got it wrong, you've got to change. So we need some clarity there, and that's where we as an association have got to work on these FAQs that we can put towards Ronald Peers, and hopefully he will adopt the FAQs from industry. Okay. What I wanted to major on more in my slot was the new things that have come into this regulation since the last regulation, and it's the circular economy things. It's environmental impact in the form of resource efficiency and material efficiency. This is, in some ways, simple, but it creates work for us as manufacturers. We now have to provide spare parts. We have to provide them within 6 weeks. We have to provide information on how to dismantle our fans and how to repair our fans. Yet there's still some grey areas that we as an industry have to think about how do we handle it. For example, variable speed drives. If the variable speed drive is integrated in the electronics of the motor drive, how do you provide that as a spare part? So therefore, there's some interpretation that we need to make to put towards the policy officer to get them to agree, is this a good interpretation? Can we provide spare parts this way? The regulation also now starts touching on other ones. I remember a lot of people say Waste Electrical Equipment Directive has nothing to do with our product. It is, because we've just been sucked into it. Inside the fan regulation is reference to the WEEE regulation, and therefore chemicals mentioned in the WEEE regulation, we have to make sure if they're present in our product, we've got to make a declaration they're there. We have to explain how to remove it at end of life. How can you extract those chemicals, and how can you reprocess them? Material efficiency heading is probably not the right heading in the regulation, but this is what the heading is. But it's talking about we have to provide professional repair services. Do we have to do that as a business, or do we have to point to somebody else? And also providing information on spare parts. And one that I didn't highlight is proprietary tools, special tools. So if we need special tools to take our motor and fan apart, we have to provide that information. But how much? Do we have to provide information on how they make it, or what does it look like? And then what's next? We know what's next in Article 8 of the regulation. It states very clearly what will be reviewed next time. So, for example, the Commission will look at fans at below 125 watts and whether it's appropriate to regulate them or not. But I've highlighted the circular economy aspects. Resource efficiency, repairability, reuse, recycling will definitely be looked at. And we know that because the overarching regulation ESPR will say so. That's what's going to be applied onto our regulation. But it's 6 years away. And it took the Commission 10 years from the review study to publish. So you could argue it's 16 years away. So why are we worried about this and also the need for digital product passports? We could be 16 years away before we need to do that. Well, in addition to that part, Article 8 of our regulation, we know in 6 years' time ESPR will be applied to us, but the Commission is also running horizontal studies. And that horizontal study is looking to do 5 mini projects. And the 5 mini projects could come out with decisions that could affect us, because that's what they said. That's the intent. Question is, which are the 5 studies? Okay, you might not better read it fully. What I've highlighted is electric motors has been highlighted as a horizontal study. In their review, the consultants identified go back one, specific measures for scarce and environmentally relevant and critical raw materials. I think we all know what a critical raw material is, for example, rare earth. But what is a scarce material? According to the Commission, you won't see it, because you might be able to see it, ferrous metal. Steel is a scarce material because you could put environmental issues on one side, on the other side, politics. The politics is we don't want to be beholden to imports into the European market. We want to be more sustainable. We want to recover that steel and reuse it. We want to recover the copper and reuse it because it makes more business sense and it's more sustainable. So it's a win-win. So this horizontal study will look at steel and copper, and the consultants recognize the data they use is out of date because the market for motors has changed. There's a lot of permanent magnet motors on the market now with electronics and magnets. So the horizontal study will include permanent magnet motors. And also what they identified was the motor, Ecodesign motor regulation, is due for revision. It's actually due for revision. It's out of date. It should have happened last year. But we know from the policy officer, it's the same policy officer for fans, Ronald Piers. He's the responsible person for motors. And he's informed us the review study will start at the end of this year. Now, are motors inside fans in scope of the motor regulation or not? Currently, the argument is motors inside fans are excluded. But the wording is weak, and it's about interpretation. So when the regulation is revised, will that wording be improved, or will that wording be removed? And therefore, will our motors inside our fans now fall within the scope? And if we now fall within the scope of the motor regulation, everything we just talked about, repairability, reuse, recyclability, material content, is not 16 years away, it's 5 or 6 years away. The review study will be a year, and there'll be 2 or 3 years of argument, and then they will update the motor regulation. So this will impact us medium term or long term. We don't know yet. Got to stay close and watch it. So in summary, the revised regulation sets some tough new standards, which Ronald talked about. There's some corrigendum, some changes that got to be done. There's interpretation. The industry has to come up with some frequently asked question document to clarify, if not for ourselves, ideally to convince the Commission this is the correct interpretation. And also it has some environmental impact, circular economy requirements. But what's next? The ESPR, circular economy, will definitely come sometime in the future. It could be short term, it could be 5 years, or it could be long term, 15 years. And on that note, I'm going to pass to Alex, who will talk a little bit more about sustainability.